Well, good morning to you this morning. It is great to see you here at Stones Hill, and it always is, but especially in this series because we're doing a series where we're just taking the large story of the Bible, breaking it down into bite-sized chunks, and working our way through the material in such a way that we understand what's going on in the larger story. And I think that if we understand the larger story, don't you have a need to know, and I know I have a need to know, that this all is going somewhere, that history is going somewhere. And I think that if we understand that, and we don't just have in black and white, we have in high definition color how history is going to go. And history is God's story, and He's going to guide that story along. And despite the broken, fallen, free will human decisions that we make, God will move His story along and fulfill His broad purposes. And I think we all have a need to know that. And having this understanding, then I think we're set up and ready to live life in the lower story. We're ready to deal with life as it comes and the challenges that we have and the problems and difficulties, the spiritual wilderness wandering years that we go through. I think we're ready to do that a lot better if we know the story's headed somewhere. So we know it's headed somewhere. Today we get to talk about chapter 6 in the story called The Wandering. And it's really an insightful chapter because I think we can all relate to periods of our life where we have been in a period of wandering. At some point in your parental life, if it hasn't happened already, you're going to have your small children. In our case, we had 3. And when you put all 3 of those kids in the back of a car and you decide you're going to go somewhere, at some point in your parental experience, on one of those trips with those 3 kids, in our case, maybe more or less in your case, but you're going to have one of those kids that will ask in a kind of whiny, obstinate, irritating voice. They're going to ask a question, and it doesn't matter if you have threatened arm and limb, that they are not to ask this question ever again. It does not matter. That's totally irrelevant. They're still going to ask the question, and you know what that question is. It's 4 words, and every parent can relate. And shall we, on the count of 3, say those 4 words on our way to this trip? All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Are we there yet? Right. That's the question. You did good. All right? And you didn't even have to work on memorizing that. Why? You've heard it so many times. Are we there yet? Okay. Imagine going on a road trip and saying, you know what, guys? We're not there yet. We're not going to be there this evening. We're not going to be there tomorrow. We're not going to be there next month. Okay? We're not going to be there next year. In fact, our whole life is going to be a journey. And instead of 200 miles straight shot, it's going to be hundreds of miles in a circle. I'm not so sure if I would have lived to survive that trip. There would have been blood shed somewhere along an interstate, all right? And it wouldn't have been good. And I have a feeling Will would have been part of it. I just throw that out, all right? It wouldn't have been good. But anyway, imagine being in that kind of situation. That's precisely where we find ourselves today in the story. That's where they were. And as we think about this, I've put, and thank you, Tom, for the update and the review, and I'll try to include those reviews, though we may not verbally go over them every week, but you can consult them there in the story resources in the YouVersion app. But in the YouVersion app resources today, I've put something in there called the lesson of geography or something like that. And the geography of what we're looking at today in this installment of the story really provides the spiritual lesson, the spiritual application point that really needs to be made here this morning. And that is, when we just look at the geography of how this thing lays out, we're going to see a very valuable lesson. And perhaps this sermon could be about 2 or 3 minutes today, and I could let you go, and you probably would have the gist of what we're trying to say. If you go to slide number 10 for me. I think slide number 10 is what I'm after first. I think we're going to eventually get there. But go to slide number 10. I'm going to reference 10, 11, and 13. And there's a couple other maps, I think, before this one. Okay, go to the next slide. Okay, right here we go. So you can see this is some of the main traveling routes that they had in this particular season of history. And you can see the little dotted lines. These were main travel routes, all right? And one was known as the Way of the Sea. The Way of the Sea would have been the absolute best and shortest way to go. Of course, the Israelites were delivered from Egypt, and they could have come up and taken the Way of the Sea right into the Promised Land. By conservative estimations, could have been as little as 1 million people, as many as 2 to 3 million people. And when you're trying to move that many people, you want a good road to travel on. If it's got some good scenery, that helps. If it's a well-traveled road, that's going to be a plus, because there's going to be amenities and things that you need along the way for about 1 million to 3 million people. All right, it makes perfect sense. I mean, if I am Google mapping this thing, all right, and I'm going to go from where we are in Egypt to the Promised Land, I'm going to take one of these well-traveled routes, probably the northerly route. They say the northerly route's the fastest route, so I would have probably taken the fastest route to get there. And God would have, guided and directed the whole process. But that's not what God does, and that's not what the Israelites choose to do. Instead, they take not the scenic route, but the dry, chalky one. They take instead not the shortest route, but the longest route. And not only do they take a non-scenic, long route, they have no amenities. And they get, in fact, they need food miraculously provided. They get so tired of manna that they want quail, and God gives them quail out their noses, as it were. He just got so frustrated because they were just like you and I on a long trip. Are we there yet? I'm tired of this food. I'm tired of that. Sitting in this seat, and they complain, and and it made the trip a whole lot longer than it needed to be. If you go, try slide number 10 for me. Slide number 10. Okay, that'll do. So what happens is they take this route, not those other 3 routes, main routes, especially the Way of the Sea, into the land flowing with milk and honey. And maybe you've heard that word before, that phrase, milk and honey. It was just a kind of a picturesque way of describing how prosperous, how wonderful the fruit and produce and other things were in this particular area and region of the known world at that time. And of course, I've been to that area, and it's absolutely gorgeous and stunning in so many ways and places. But that's what they mean. It's this prosperous land with all of our needs met, food and water and lush vegetation and just a variety of terrains. It would have been wonderful. Okay, they could have gone in maybe it could have, let's consider there's some slow ones in the bunch. It could have probably happened in 20 to 30 days. But instead, they follow this line right here into the wilderness. They camp at the base of Mount Sinai. They then get word that it's time to move and let's go into the land. Number 2, they follow that orange route up, and they're right at Kadesh Barnea. They are right on the brink of the Promised Land, freshly delivered out of Egypt. The Promised Land, okay, they've been in Egypt for 400 years. The Promised Land, or the land of Canaan, present-day Israel, it has been occupied over that 400-year period by various groups and cultures known as the Canaanites, and a lot of other ites in there too. And so they have now possessed the land, and it's going to be a fight to claim that land that God had promised via the Abrahamic covenant, and later expanded upon by the Davidic covenant, the new covenant, and the Davidic covenant, the Abrahamic and the Mosaic covenant. Okay, so I'm trying to get in my head, remember all those covenants I talked to you about last week. But God had made a covenant. He promised that area. If they would commit to Him, God would commit to them. He would be their husband. They would be His wife. And they would go into the promised land, right off into the sunset, and fulfill His purposes for the world. They sent some spies in. That's what the little yellow 2 is about up there. The spies go in. 10 say, "We can't do this. What are you doing, Moses? Why have you brought us out here to perish? Only brought us out of Egypt only to be slaughtered by these Canaanites. We can't do this." Only 2 of them said, "We can do this." And that was Joshua and Caleb. But the majority rules, and so they decide they're not going to obey God. And instead of going into the land after going in an out-of-the-way route, they get the privilege of doing one of these things called a wilderness loop. Have you ever been on a wilderness loop? Okay? Anybody here ever taken the long way around? Huh? Anybody? At one time in your life, you've taken the long way around. It wasn't the most scenic route. It wasn't the shortest route. It was the longest route, perhaps a boring route, a difficult route, a difficult road to travel, and I'll be daggone if you didn't take it, and I didn't take it. That is the story of humanity. We take the long way around so many times. And so they got the privilege of doing one of these little green 3, the little green line, and here we go. And they get to take a big circle, all right? And they eventually end up in Kadesh Barnea again, and they get a retake after about 38 to 40 years of traveling in the wilderness. And so the question today, really, like I said, this whole message is a geography lesson that turns spiritual. And that is that it is in our spiritual wilderness places many times that we learn to lean on God the most. And we learn what we need to learn in life the best. It may not be pleasant to look at. It may be difficult. The resources of life may be minimal, compared to maybe other routes that we could have traveled. But it's in the wilderness places that God often meets us, and we realize that He is all that we need. And He brings us through by His daily strength, and by His daily blessing. Your time in the wilderness will reveal to you stuff in your life, and maybe stuff that's kind of below the surface here in your lower story. But many times it's those wilderness wanderings that God uses in a barren place to refine us, to speak to us, to get us where we need to be in life. And so oftentimes, and the Israelites are no exception, they get to that place of Kadesh Barnea where they're ready to go in and do what God wants them to do, and they're ready to plunge forward. And all they could think about was Egypt. Way back in Egypt. That's all they could think about. And it wasn't even that good for them there. But they made it sound like it was great compared to the doubts and things that they had in front of them. And so what we have to do is resist returning to Egypt, because it's in the wilderness and it's full steam ahead. It's moving forward where there's life and there's plenty and there's the will of God provided in ample form for us, and His blessings in the form of His blessings, and a stable place, and to be all that He's called us to be, you see. And so we come to this place in the story where this newly married nation, still on her honeymoon, mind you, takes a wrong turn, and it results in the years of wandering in the wilderness. And so the 3 big complaints that we see that really ties in instrumentally to the wrong turn that Israel ends up taking here is that they were complaining of the general hardships of the trip. Another group of complaints seemed to center on the food that they had to eat. And a third grouping of complaints seems to be that Moses was their leader and they weren't sure why they couldn't be the leader. Moses was the driver, and they didn't know why somebody else couldn't be the driver. And they're just like us today. They had accepted God's marriage proposal, okay, but they still struggled. But they got weary with eating. They got weary with working, sleeping, packing up the tent, and moving, and doing it all over again the next day. They're just like us. They liked that longer menu option. They liked the stability of a place. Even if it was Egypt, we didn't have to pack up a tent and move every day. And so they thought about this, and they thought about this, and they got to a place where they just felt like they were in the wilderness. And the wilderness, well, let's just define it this way, it's the place between where you started and where you feel like you're headed. And it's life in between. And a lot of times there's a lot of those yellow wilderness loops in there. And that's where they were. And God's like, I'm your husband. I'm going to provide. You're my bride. I'm going to take care of you. Just obey me. Slip that Mosaic covenant wedding band on your finger and obey me. And I'm going to promise to bless you and to guide you and bless our marriage together. And I'm going to provide you with the home. And I'm going to do all these wonderful things for you. But already, not even off the wilderness honeymoon yet, they're starting to question. And they're starting to disobey. And they're starting to doubt, and they're starting to complain, and they're starting to have a spirit of complaint. And so God has to check this. And it was a pretty major deal as we read here in the story and we discover some of what their thoughts were. But as I think about it more and more, their thoughts are our thoughts. Because haven't you been there? You thought marriage was going to be great. And all your needs would be met. Maybe you thought your family would always get along with another family. Maybe you thought that a marriage partner would always be there for you. And you discovered they weren't. Or maybe you thought that getting out of your place of bondage would mean automatic blessings. That if I get out of Egypt somehow, God's blessing will be poured out in my life and the spigot would just open up. Maybe it hasn't happened that way. Maybe you're tired of eating the same old things, wearing the same old clothes and shoes, and looking at the same old people, and working at the same old job, and sitting in the same old cubicle, the same old office, and always experiencing the same old results. We're just like the Israelites. You and I are right there with them in a spiritual wilderness. We're just like them. My team never wins. My leaders never get elected. My family never gets invited. My department always gets the cuts. My contribution never gets acknowledged. My goals never get accomplished. My heart is always the one that gets broken in this family. Things just don't get any better, and I'm tired of it. You ever been there? All of their accumulated disappointments had distracted them to the point where they decided they're not going to obey God anymore. And they're not even off their honeymoon. So God has a very sobering thing, a very heavy thing He has to share with them. And that is in Numbers 14, slide number 4. So tell them, as surely as I live, declares the Lord. This is Numbers 14, verse 28. I will do to you the very thing I heard you say. In this wilderness, your bodies will fall. Every one of you 20 years of old or more, who was counted in the census and who has grumbled against me, not one of you will enter the land. Like, wow, isn't that cruel? I mean, that's pretty tough news to receive. And frankly, I think God's being gracious, because I knew what was right and wrong well before I was 20. All right? Well before. And so God's being very gracious here to make it 20 years old or more, who was counted in the census and who has grumbled against me. And see, in verse 2 of Numbers 14, we see that they said, would that we had died in this wilderness, Moses. I wish we would just die out here, because it would be a lot easier than what the mess you've got us into. You got us out of our home. We're strung out here in the middle between a starting point and a destination. We're going in loops, or it feels like we're going in loops. And you know what? We should just die out here because where we got to go and it's occupied, there's no way we can do what you're asking us to do and what God seems to be asking us to do. It reminds me of something C.S. Lewis said. He said, those who say to God, there's two types of people in the world. Those who say to God, thy will be done, will go and take the land. There's that group of people. And those to whom God finally says, thy will be done, you can die in the wilderness if you want. Two types of people in the world. Both hear those words, thy will be done. And that's really the decisions we have. Thy will be done. We'll obey. We'll follow God. He'll be the love of my life. I'll put all of my hope in Him. Or I'm not going to obey God. He's not going to be the love of my life. And I'm going to do life the way I want to do it. And God eventually says, okay, if you people are determined to do that, I'm going to give you what you want. You want quail? Here's a month's supply. Eat quail, eat your heart's content. You want life without me? Here's the road. Here's the wilderness. It's all yours. It's all yours for the taking. But I love you. And I'm going to eventually do my work in the world. I'm going to do my work through you, but it's going to be with another generation. There's times I think that maybe we've lost a generation just like they lost here because of our own disobedience sometimes. It's amazing how even the children have to suffer because of parental consequences of the decisions that they made. Well, verse 30 says, not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand. And God pictures Himself as a covenant maker with uplifted hand to make your home, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. And if God would have let them go in with their doubtful hearts, all of them would have been slaughtered. They weren't ready. And God understands this. And so He has to guide them this way because there's no way they could survive with the current state of their hearts of unbelief. And so verse 31, as for your children that you said would be taken as plunder, I will bring them in to enjoy the land you have rejected. Slide number 5, verse 32. But as for you, your bodies will fall in the wilderness. Your children will be shepherds, that is, wilderness nomads, grazing their flock on available land. Here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness. Wow. They're not even off their honeymoon, and God's already thrown out that word, unfaithfulness. Betraying their marriage vow to God. Already. Well, until the last of your bodies lies in the wilderness, God says. Verse 34, for 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land, you will suffer for your sins. It's crazy because it takes only 40 hours for Israel to get out of Egypt, but somebody said it takes 40 years for Egypt to get out of the people. 40 hours to get Israel out of Egypt. But 40 years to get Egypt out of the people. And I think therein probably lies one of our greatest lessons as it ties into this geography lesson, spiritual application here, is that so many times it takes long time, many years, for us to get our heart right, for us to understand what a priority ought to be, for us to understand what my role is in the world, what God's calling me to do, and how He's asking me to do it. It takes a lot of times longer than 40 years for some of us to get the message. But it's going to take them at least that long for them to understand what it means to walk with God and God to walk with them and to be their everything. And so many times we have Egypt in our hearts. We have Egypt. I want Egypt. I want what used to be, those old familiar patterns of the past. The old familiar places and people and the old familiar the familiar life that I had. That's what sounds comfortable and inviting, and that's what sounds like an escape to me, and that's what I want. And our hearts gravitate back to Egypt. God says, you know what, there's no life there. I'm going to take care of you in the wilderness, but I want you to push forward into a new life, a new place, a new relationship. And so And he says, for 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land, you will suffer for your sins and know what it's like to have me against you. You're going to know what it's like to live on your own for a while until you can realize who it is that really loves you and who it is that's made a promise to always, and a covenant to always love you no matter what circumstances change in your life. I'm going to let you go. I'm going to let you experience what it is you think you want, because it's only then, through the experience of real life lived out, will you understand what love is really about. Hasn't that happened in our lives so many times? I think it has. Where God has let us go, the wilderness, into the spiritual wilderness, so we would understand really what love was about and what it is that's important in our life. And He does that. Verse 35 says, I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will surely do these things to this whole wicked community, which has banded together against me. It's really the story of the world. It's a world that's banding together against God to keep God out. And it's really a kind of a little mini picture of what's happening in the world at large. They will meet their end, though, in this wilderness, God says, and here they will die. And like I said, I feel like there's times when I feel like another lost generation is taking place because of maybe the decisions that we've made to live life apart from God, to do life our own way. And when we face this kind of news, guys, when we face this kind of news that it's terminal, you're going to be in the spiritual wilderness for a while. It's a life sentence, or maybe it's something irreversible that we learn about, or maybe we hear those words, we can't operate, or we can't fix this problem. There's no human being or group or hospital alive that can take care of this. You're going to be in a spiritual wilderness for a while, and the only way to get through that spiritual wilderness is to have the Lord in your life. That's the only way. And what we learn in the wilderness, we begin to see what's really important. And I just, as I thought about this week, I thought about that lost generation and how they had to pick themselves up and keep moving, even though they knew it was going to be 40 long years before and many of them wouldn't even be the ones that would inherit the land. It would be their kids, their children, maybe even some of their grandchildren. And when we receive that kind of news, it's so important that we learn what's important in life. And so I imagine they probably decided, you know what? Let's enjoy the sunset this morning. We're not sure what the future holds, and yeah, we don't quite maybe understand everything, and I wish we could go back and do things differently, but we're here, we're together, let's watch a sunset this morning. I imagine some of them said that. And I imagine some of them probably valued eating a hearty meal together because, hey, we're here, we're together, we're moving through the wilderness together. Let's enjoy a little bit of food together. And maybe they realized that instilling the right values in your kids at an early age was important, and so maybe they invested in some of that in these wilderness years. And maybe they held each other's hand a little more affectionately, knowing that they're going to go through this and they're going to share the longing of having a place out there that they wanted to be, and maybe in life or a goal they wanted to see fulfilled or accomplished, and knew they weren't going to be able to fulfill that. And so they just probably held hands at times. Some of them held hands at time, and they pointed to the longing, and they said to each other, someday. And so in the wilderness, you learn what home is. You learn what a good meal means. You learn what a family circle is. You learn what fun a campfire with friends can be. You learn the value of a funny story to break out the monotony of a chalky, dry, and hot and humid walk. Sometimes in the wilderness, it's a quiet walk or a morning run that you learn to find joy in it. And in the end, you realize out there that God becomes your joy. And Moses stands before this new generation of Israelites after 40 years of wandering. And he stands again at Kadesh Barnea, where they had chosen not to go into the land the first time 40 years prior. And he says here in his valedictory speech to this new generation of Israelites, he says two basic words. And it's the two words that we all have to decide to say and to live out. When we're in a wilderness, a spiritual wilderness loop of life, two words. And Moses says it so well. Choose life. choose life. In Deuteronomy 30:19, we see it's so basic, it's so straightforward. He's like, here's the one thing you can do, new generation, before you graduate from the school, the Institute of Higher Learning called the Spiritual Wilderness. Before you turn the tassel and get your PhD in what it means to live in the wilderness for a while, I want to give you your valedictory address, and this is what I want you to remember. 2 words. Choose life. Marriage with Yahweh is not difficult. He's a great husband. But like all people, really, like the Israelites, we have issues. We get lost sometimes. We lose our way. But it'll always come back to one basic thing. Choose life. I choose to place my affection on the one who has loved me. I choose to place my affection on the one who has loved me, who has covenanted with me, who has romanced me. He's provided for me. He's walked with me for better, for worse. I choose us. And if you ever hope to get out of your spiritual wilderness, you're going to have to come to that place of decision to choose us, to choose you and God together, walking this thing called life. And you may not be in the promised land of where it is you want to be, but there's a sunset to enjoy with Him. There's a meal you can enjoy. There's a family to raise. And in a very real sense, and I kind of get emotional thinking about it, this is really the story of life. You know, we are here, and we have things that happen, and we have tough things that happen in the spiritual wilderness, and life is like a wilderness journey. And we walk through this thing called life, and every day we have a decision we got to make. Are we going to make the best of it? Are we going to make the most of it? Or are we going to pine the fact of what we didn't do the last 40 years? Are we just going to lose future years out in front of us because we're just going to focus on that little circular wilderness wandering loop that we often get ourselves into? Is that going to be the focus of life? Moses says if that's going to be your focus, you're not going to make it. He says choose life. Choose it every day. This day, Deuteronomy, slide number 6. Deuteronomy chapter 30, 19 and 20. This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you, he says, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live. I want you to re-enter into the covenant with me, Israel. I want you to renew the covenant right now before you take this next step in your spiritual journey. Renew the covenant with me, to love me and to walk with me. Verse 20, that you may love the Lord your God, listen to His voice, and hold fast to Him. Sounds like a marriage, doesn't it? That you may listen to each other and love the Lord together and hold fast to Him together and point at the promised land and say, by God's grace, someday. We're not there yet. But by God's grace, someday we'll make it. And then he says these powerful words, for the Lord is your life. In the wilderness loops, the Lord is your life. It's in the wilderness loop that we learn this, and it's only then that we can really learn it. The Lord is your life. He will give you many years in the land, he says, that he swore to give to your fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And what I love about Moses, he's a spiritual action guy, a spiritual decision guy. He says, I want you to step up and make a decision. I want you to take action. And I want you to decide that the Lord is going to be your life, your whole world. And you're going to walk with Him. And then you can take whatever it is, whatever challenges are in front of you. You know, I kind of went through a spiritual wilderness. I've gone through many spiritual wildernesses in my life. And I was kind of in a spiritual wilderness, probably not as long ago as you would think. But it's like, God, I got to break this fog I'm in. I got to break past this. Because, you know, when you're pastoring a church and you're in a spiritual wilderness and you really succumb to that, it's going to be tough to pastor a church. It's going to be tough to preach a sermon. It's going to be tough to, do all the things that pastors need to be able to do. And like I said, it's kind of in a spiritual wilderness, probably not as far, as long ago as you might think. And here's the things that really got me through. And I'm indebted to Keith Drury, an Indiana Wesleyan University professor who I didn't go there, but I read his book, and he had some things that he noted in one of his books, and it's in your YouVersion resources of apps. And he says, if you're in a spiritual wilderness, if you're like in a fog and you can't break through, he says, first of all, take action. Number one, take action. And that's what Moses is essentially doing here. Take action, Israelites. Choose. Make a choice. Start moving. Begin something. Do something you've never done before, but you have got to be jolted out of this endless wilderness loop that you've been in for so long. You've got to get out of that. And so do something different, he says. And that's what essentially Moses is saying. And so, you know what? What can I do different to shake myself from this spiritual fog? Some of you know one of the things I started doing is kind of a season of repentance for me was running. It's like I've never done that before. This is different. And so I decided to kind of let's break up the routine. Let's start addressing this. And so it's one of the things I did. At the current time, I'm trying to run 1 mile for every year in the year 2016. I'm right now about like the midway through the 3rd century is about where I'm at, and God speaks to me out there, and it's part of just breaking up this spiritual fog thing that just kind of settles over you sometime. You got to do something different. Take action, Moses says. Make a decision. Okay? Number 2, focus on others. Number 2, you want to break out of your spiritual wilderness loop, focus on other people. It's really time for me to focus on my wife and my marriage. There's been times that relationship has been a spiritual wilderness, and she'd be the first to tell you that. And so one of the things that's important to do when you're in a spiritual wilderness, you got to start focusing on other people, and start with your husband or your wife if you're married, or a close friend if you're not married. That's the place to start. Not just on you and your needs. It's focusing on somebody else's and their needs and what they're feeling and where they're at. And I've just decided to invest maybe a little more in others, and I have some different goals associated with what it means to focus on others. I won't get into all that, but just to let you know, if you take action, number 1, number 2, focus on others, it will help pull you out of that fog that can settle over us, especially in the cold, wintry seasons of life like we have here in Northeast Indiana. I had forgotten what 60 degrees felt like. I'm just thinking, thank you, 60 degrees, how I've missed you. Those warm rays holding me close, and the long, skinny, cold, chilly fingers of winter. She's losing her grip, and life is coming back, and I'm thrilled about it. I know you are too. But take action. Focus on others. Number 3, let the past go. Okay? They could spend 40 years. They spent 40 years in the wilderness. Moses says, you know what, you can obsess on that 40 years and chalk it up as a lost deal. Don't do that, he says. Let the past go. Choose life today. Move forward into a new way of looking at life. Let the past go. Make a decision to move on. Live in grace. Don't let the hurts of yesterday plague your eyes and sabotage the hopes of tomorrow. Deal with your wounds while you're in the wilderness. We all have to have time to do that. But he says, let it go. Let the past go. I think a 4th thing is set a few goals. All right? Set a few goals. That'll help break you out of your fog. So take action. Focus on others. Let the past go. Set a few goals. 5, show some self-control. And boy, I tell you what, if you don't show self-control, you'll get in an area of your life where it'll start dominating and dictating to you how you're going to live your life. whether it's addiction or something, that'll send you in a spiritual wilderness. If you have no goals or direction in life, that'll send you in a spiritual wilderness. If you won't let the past go, that'll send you in a spiritual wilderness, because all you're thinking about is a continuous unforgiving loop. If you won't focus on others, that'll send you into the spiritual wilderness, because it's all about you and your needs. If you don't take action, you are spiritual wilderness bound, baby. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of not if, but when. And so what I hold before you is kind of like what Moses did in that valedictory speech among the next generation of Israelites. I hold out to you this two-word exhortation. And Moses just sums all that up in this simple two words: choose life. Will you choose it? Will you choose it? I'm reminded of one of my favorite quotations from Frederick Buechner. Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid. Lean into what it is the Lord has for you. And you can make it. Every person lives out a unique script of wilderness wanderings and hardship. Maybe it's singleness for some people when marriage was the goal. Maybe it's a physical disability. Maybe it's poverty. Maybe it's abuse you've had in your life. Maybe it's the feeling of being unloved. Maybe it's a racial prejudice. Maybe it's chronic illness. Maybe it's family dysfunction. Maybe it's addiction. Maybe it's a broken marriage. Wilderness loops. And see, God's story, I want you to see this morning, isn't always about parting Red Seas. It's not always about thundering from Mount Sinai and sending lightning bolts from the heavens. No. God's story works from below that, the lower story sometimes. And it's under the surface of our lower stories that God works. And He calls out to each of us from below the story of our lives. And He calls out through the weaknesses that we have. And He calls out to us through the limitations that we feel and the brokenheartedness that we carry. He calls out through that. And when we see it that way, it opens up the possibility of redemption through the very things that we resent most about our lives. When God's voice can be heard through this stuff, then all of a sudden it opens up a new possibility. Two simple words. Choose life. I don't know where you are today. Some of you, may be facing big decisions in your life in the next few weeks or months. And do I address one today who might be considering an abortion, or maybe you're one who has provided an abortion? Could I offer the words, choose life? If you go against your deep conscience, it's going to plunge you into spiritual wilderness. I won't go in. I don't have time to go into all the testimonials of people who have decided to go this path, this wilderness wandering, and they are riddled with hopelessness, a sense of guilt, a sense of sorrow. Those who have provided them, those who have engaged in them. I don't care about all the answers about why you're for or why you're against. I don't care about that. Those who choose this path always end up in a spiritual wilderness. Why is that? Can I offer to you those two words? Choose life. Abby Johnson wrote a book entitled Unplanned. She was the director of a Planned Parenthood facility in Texas. I'll share this one with you. She was asked to assist a doctor one day in a procedure. Let's call it a procedure. 8 years she had ran a Planned Parenthood in Texas. And she had never watched this unfold. And she was asked to help with this particular procedure that day. And she watched a battle unfold between a tiny baby fighting for its life and a doctor with a device. She said that experience plunged her in a spiritual wilderness. And she ended up in Switzerland in a circle with a bunch of other individuals from all over the world who had taken tens of thousands of lives via abortion. And she said, I watched them struggle in this small circle, and I watched them struggle to pray these profound prayers of apology because they couldn't get rid of it, this burden that they carried, and how it had turn their life path into a spiritual wilderness. And she says she watched them in that circle struggle. And so do I address one who has decisions to make regarding this particular area of life? Could I offer those words, choose life? Do I address one today who is so weary with single life that you're feeling like you're unseen and nobody sees you and nobody knows you and nobody understands the value of what you offer in the world? And you've just decided, well, you know what? If I can't beat them, I'll join them. I'll do the hookup thing. I'll stop honoring God in this area of my life. Can I offer the observation this morning that everybody that I've talked to that has decided to do the hookup thing, every one of them will tell you it's a spiritual wilderness, Joey. It's a spiritual wilderness. Tell people, don't do this. And it's amazing the ones that do this, and they have friends that have not yet done it, and they will tell those friends, don't go the hookup route. Because it's a devastation. It's more wilderness, and there's more remorse, and there's more sorrow with that kind of life than any other life path that I might have chosen. And talk about a spiritual wilderness and a loss of respect in the hookup culture. I mean, you do what really God has designed us to do in marriage relationships, and you do those things, and it's supposed to emotionally connect you with people. But in the hookup culture, if you get connected and you expect a call the next day, it's like so socially taboo that you're considered, it's a technical foul. You've committed a high crime and treason because you actually let sex mean something. You actually let kissing mean something. And it's like, well, this is crazy. It's crazy. It's turning, the way God designed it on its head. And so do I address one today that's so tired of the single life that you need to look at those two words of choosing life yet again? Do I address one who is getting entangled in a snare of whether it's romantic novels, female pornography, or whether it's graphic pictures and videos and things of male pornography, and feeding our romantic inclinations and desires that way, and beginning to go down those kinds of paths rather than working through the difficulties of relationship and thus having a deeper love because of it? Are we looking to end run and shortcut across some of the hard issues of life and taking our desire for intimacy to these other places, these wilderness places? Guys, I could tell you over the years, so many men and women, they will tell you, you know what? This is a spiritual wilderness. We just sink under the load of this kind of life. I talked to my wife not long ago, and there's a novel called 50 Shades of Grey, and it's really female pornography, and listen to your pastor now. It's not good stuff. But I was like, you know what, Donna, I feel like I need to look at this because 125 million copies has sold worldwide by June 2015. 50 Shades of Grey. I think there's a movie out now about this. And it's about a young college student who's needy, and it's about a well-accomplished businessman. Christian Grey is his name. Anastasia Steele is the lady's name. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to read this. I want you to know about it. Or I want to look at. I'm not going to read all of this, but I'm going to take a look at it, Donna. I want you to know about it. Okay, I'm not doing anything on the side here. I just want you to know. I got to know what's in the heads of females. 125 million females or males. I want to know why they're thinking this way. I want to know what it is that's getting its tentacles around the hearts of our women and deceiving the hearts of our men. And so I did. I've read some of this. I do not recommend it. It is pornographic in places. 50 Shades of Grey, 125 million copies. You realize if you sell 1 million books, they consider you a publishing genius? 125 million copies. What are we craving? Why are we craving this? Well, Christian is this guy. He has power. He has facility. He's got panoramic views. He's got beauty and wealth and status. He has purpose and intrigue and mystery. He holds Anastasia's attention. He does all the little things that really good Christian guys ought to do, right? He leads her out of elevators. He helps her through doors. He helps her across the street. He holds her hand. He's very relaxed. He's nice. He has a clean smell. He touches her softly and gently, cares for her. His place has immaculate taste with great decor and art and fireplace and all those things. And Anastasia is a young college student. She's longing for romance, confidence. She's insecure. She tells herself that she doesn't really mean that much to this powerful guy. And like all women, she wants to be valued. She wants to be esteemed. She wants to be noticed. And so he pursues her, and she gets a rush in her mind, tossing that question back and forth. Does he like me? Does he not like me? She can't sleep. She notes how he dresses, all the things that he says and does. She's totally taken by him. And he plays it well. He uses her name. He touches her subtly. He walks her to the elevator. He tells her how much he loves her, how much he loves it when she nervously bites her lower lip. You see? Reeling her in. Lots of eye contact. Shares his cell phone number. Arranges for future meetings. It's relational, romantic, high voltage. He rescues her even from danger, and he has an opportunity to take advantage of her, but he shows restraint. He's a helicopter pilot. He whisks her away on date trips and things. But she has this dark side. And she has to sign a legal document to never disclose what she does with him. And this is where it turns dark. And this is where you skip a lot of pages because it's hard to read. But instead of being this woman of God, this young college co-ed, okay, with normal desires and romance, longings and things, instead of being this loved and cherished married woman who comes alive to her husband because of the special place she has in his heart, she's being exploited. And 125 million copies later, we have women and men who have been reeled into this pseudo-romance. And I know when I got done with just the parts that I read, I said to myself, I'll be daggone if I let Christian Grey outdo me. I'm going to hold my wife's hand more tenderly. I'm going to look in her eyes more deeply. How did the Valentine thing go last week, by the way? Huh? Did that go okay? Yeah. Hey, okay. Joey, okay? Coming in. Pupils dilated. They dilated. Yes, it worked. Okay? They like, you know what? It works. They like those special hand-delivered Valentine's cards. Listen, guys. There's a reason why men and women are being drawn to these kinds of things. And in female pornography, the romantic love interest is always focused on the female, exhausting all of his energies on pleasing her. And we have adopted these same kinds of thought patterns in our relationships. In fact, the ideal male is this person who lets life revolve around the female all the time. And he always has undying love and sweet words, and he may perform heroic rescues, and he may make her laugh on occasion. And he's never grumpy, ever, in the female world of pornography. You know, Haley DeMarco tells her story of female porn consumption. She says, a few years ago, I went to a movie with my roommate, and it was an adventure movie in the footsteps of James Bond. There was murder, foreign intrigue, romance, and he's the hero, of course, and he saves the world, and he saves the girl, and at the end of the movie, she says, the male star meets his leading lady in the ultimate romantic cabin in the woods. The room was divine, and there's animal skin rugs adorning the floors. There's candles in the cabin. There's flower petals decorated the overstuffed bed, and she jumps into his arms, and she's carried off for a night of romantic passion. And the credits roll. And Haley DeMarco, she's a Christian writer, she says, I watched this with my friend, and we both looked at each other, and we both bit our bottom lips, and we looked at the screen as if craving for more. Do I address a lady today who has been caught up in the spiritual wilderness? Maybe not 50 Shades of Grey, but you're caught up in that world, that fantasy world where you're going to build Fantasy Island. And everything is going to be different in that world. Do I address a man today who has gotten so caught up in this kind of thing and so convinced that this is the way he's got to express himself personally, relationally, even sexually? Do I address those individuals this morning? And if so, could I hold those two valedictory words before you that Moses held before a new generation of wilderness graduates? Could I offer you those two words? Choose life. Choose life. Do I address a married couple who's just about ready to throw in the towel? You know, maybe a lady longs to be held and desired. Longs to share a meal with someone that loves and cares for and is attentive to her. Longs to have a conversation with someone at the end of the day. A lady has those God-given needs, and that's what I hate about 50 Shades of Grey. I detest that book. I hate that book. And because that kind of thinking has so infiltrated, and then it gets, like I said, it sneaks its way into the back door of our thinking, and now these God-given needs that women have are exploited for no good. And I think about that, and I can't even remember the names of the movies, but I think I saw two movies. In one movie, a couple was hiking together, and they had a guide, and on that hike, they encounter an unexpected hiker, and the unexpected hiker pulls a gun and points it at this hiking party with the guide and the man and the woman, and in that instinctual moment, the man steps back, he pushes his girlfriend in front. Okay? That fun hike was over after that. Yes. And the rest of the story is about how she struggled with a boyfriend that would do that to her. A second movie I saw, I don't even know the name of it, just remember it because I knew how it spoke to me. The family's eating on a patio at a ski lodge in the winter, I think Swiss Alps somewhere, and then there's an avalanche that happens, and this thing starts coming down, and they're sitting in the patio area. It's warm enough, sunny that day, so they can sit outside. It's not too cold. And the avalanche is coming down the mountains, and it goes further than they think it's going to go, and it comes hard, and it comes fast. And everybody dives for cover, and the guy's sitting at the table, his wife is here, his two kids are here, and when he sees it's coming too close, he dives out of the way, away from his family, and runs away, and it's only his wife left behind. He's trying to shelter those two kids. And like when I saw that, it's like, oh God, I repent. How many times, guys, how many times have we done that in our relationships with our women? The avalanche is coming, and we head for cover. And they're sitting there like a hen brooding over her chicks, not going anywhere because, by golly, I'm not leaving them. Do I address a husband like that today? And could I hold out those two words? Choose life. Choose life. There's a better way. A better way. Well, I'm going to wrap this up this morning, but all of this reminds me of a scene from Family Man. How many of you have watched the movie Family Man? Now, it's a good movie, okay? It's a good movie. Some of you have. It's a great movie. Jack Campbell, played by Nicolas Cage in the story. He's a successful and a talented businessman, and he's happily living his single life. And he has everything, or so he thinks, and one day he wakes up in a new life. And he experiences a glimpse of an alternate universe, a different world. Instead of leaving his college girlfriend for a London trip back when they were young, which is really what happened, he decided to stay in his vision. And in his vision, he stayed, and the entire movie is about what life would have been like if he would have chosen to stay in the States, marry his sweetheart, and raise a family together. And he realizes that he's living the life he could have lived if he had not gone to London to study and become an investment banker, but had stayed in the United States with his then girlfriend. And so from a very fast-moving, wealthy, but single life, Jack Campbell now experiences a family life. And he's never experienced it before, but it's in his vision, you see. He's married to Kate. He lives in Jersey. He has 2 kids. Of course, he desperately wants his life back because he's a president of P.K. Lassiter Investment House. He's not a tire salesman at Big Ed's, all right? And in real life, he drives a Ferrari and not a minivan that never starts, all right? And in real life, he gets to wear designer suits, and now he's got throw up from his kids on his clothes. This is the life of Jack Campbell, the new alternative life that he could have had had he chosen differently and earlier in his life. Well, he does some serious stuff that's huge blunders. He misses opening presents on Christmas Day. He flirts with a married woman because he thinks he's still single. He forgets his anniversary. Does all these things, but he finally begins to learn to bond. He learns to fall in love with his wife. He learns to work hard at his job. But even then, he wants to better themselves. He wants to better himself and the family. And he wants to score a big job with higher pay. And he's putting pressure on Kate to go along with his plans. And Kate finally comes to the place in their relationship where she says those words that I've kind of said over and over again here this morning. She says, "I choose us." Watch this scene. And he's trying to create a vision just like she did in that scene. "I want you to choose life," he says. "I want you to renew your covenant vows with Yahweh God. I want you to renew that covenant. I know it's been a rough marriage so far, but Israelites, you've gone through some detours and things, but there is no greater love. I know you've flirted with the Midianites. I know you've doubted God's love. I know that you've had these incredibly intense arguments where you've said things that you really didn't mean, and yet they were other times you said things that you did mean to hurt the heart of Yahweh God. And if you're 20 and you know better, if you're 60 and you're doubting God's love, Moses says you can choose life." At the end of the Family Man movie, Jack Campbell has lived his entire life in his vision with Kate, and they have raised a family together. But finally, life snaps back to reality. And Jack wants to stay in his family man life. He doesn't want to leave it. And he's hanging on to it because he's finally seen what could have been and what could have been. And he doesn't want to leave his wife. He doesn't want to leave his kids that throw up on his clothes. He doesn't want to leave his dog that takes forever to use the bathroom when he takes him outside. He doesn't want to leave his dull job at Big Ed's anymore. He chooses us, them. And with that vision fresh on his mind, he goes and he finds Kate, whom he knew many years before this moment. And she's getting ready to get on a plane herself and head off to another country to work. And Jack is coming fresh off of this vision. She has no idea what he's talking about. She hasn't experienced what he experienced. And he shows up at the airport just before she gets on board. I want you to watch this as we close it up here today. Watch the vision he creates. And perhaps that's the vision that God is creating for you today. Watch this closing.